say hi first to everybody. I'm Kate. I'm the readings coordinator here, and I'll be your host for tonight's event. So welcome virtually to the Elliott Bay Book Company. We are zooming from the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish. On behalf of the staff of Elliott Bay, we appreciate you tuning into this program. We're excited tonight to welcome virtually Monica Macansantos for a reading of and a conversation about her debut collection of stories that are about Filipinos at home and in the diaspora, love and other rituals. She will be joined by Seattle author Donna Miscolta for a conversation tonight. So I'll go ahead and introduce both of our guests tonight, and then Monica is going to read some from the book. And then she and Donna will chat, and then we'd love to leave some space at the end for anyone to ask questions. So just help us kind of stay organized by putting comments in the chat box, and then you can put your questions in the Q&A box. And then that way, Donna will be able to find them easily to get to them to answer your questions. Okay, so our guests tonight, starting with our wonderful interlocutor, Donna Miscolta. She has 3 books of fiction. Her most recent is Living Color, Angie Rubio Stories, and it was a finalist for the Washington State Book Award. It was named to the 2020 Latino Books of the Year list by the Las Comadres and Friends National Latino Book Club. It won the Next Generation Indie Book Award for Multicultural Fiction and an International Latino Book Award Gold Medal for Best Collection of Short Stories. Her previous 2 books are Hola and Goodbye, Una Familia and Stories, and When the De La Cruz Family Danced. Her work has appeared in a variety of journals and anthologies and has been supported by grants and fellowships from For Culture, Artist Trust, Bread Loaf, Rona Jaffe Foundation, the Jack Straw Foundation, and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, as well as by residencies at Anderson Center, Artsmith, Atlantic Center for the Arts, Hedgebrook, Mineral School, Ragdale, and Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. So thank you and welcome, Donna. And then our guest of honor tonight, Monica Macansantos, is actually tuning in. It's morning for her, so she has some lovely sunlight in the background while I have complete darkness in my background. She is a former James A. Michener Fellow for Fiction and Poetry at the University of Texas at Austin, where she earned her MFA in writing. She also holds a PhD in English and creative writing from the Victoria University of Wellington International Institute of Modern Letters. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Colorado Review, the Hopkins Review, the Masters Review, Lunch Ticket, Electric Literature, and Literary Hub, among other places. Her work has been recognized as notable in the Best American Essays 2016 and has received finalist and honorable mention citations from the Glimmer Train Fiction Open. Her work has been supported with fellowships from Hedgebrook, the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center for the Arts, the iPark Foundation, and the Story Knife Writers Retreat. So please, everyone, join me in virtually welcoming Monica and Donna.
Thanks for everybody for coming. And we're going to start with Monica reading an excerpt from her book.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Elliott Bay, for having me here on this lovely morning in the Philippines and lovely evening in Seattle. Thank you everyone for coming. And I'm going to read from the final story in the collection, which is entitled Leaving Auckland, and it's about Filipino immigrants in New Zealand. Leaving Auckland. Maya was fast asleep in her loft when Paulo rose from his airbed, his thin travel blanket falling away from his knees. The wind had pulled him from the depths of sleep. It was the kind of wind that sounded like a wailing child when it made its way into his dreams. Now that the brief warmth of summer had given way to the chill of autumn, this howl had become an insidious coming and going in his ears, reminding him that he wasn't used to this sound, that he was far away from home. Although Maya's twin bed could fit them both, Maya struggled to sleep beside him. So they ended up buying an air bed for him early on in their relationship. Before going to sleep, they'd lie parallel to each other in separate beds. Him asking her about the dreams she had, her asking him if he was warm enough. Secure in his love, she fell asleep before he did, leaving him to ponder over the love he offered her. It was when she was asleep that his loneliness crept in, driving a wedge between them in the dark. In the morning, after every second night he spent with her, he'd fly back to Auckland, leaving her alone in the solitude of her Wellington apartment with the promise of his return. He approached the window and put a finger between the Venetian blinds, peering into the darkness at a city that slept. The Victorian houses that rose from the flanks of Mount Victoria glowed in the night, asserting their Englishness in the middle of the South Pacific. New Zealand was a blank slate to the builders of the city, a land one could fashion whichever way one wanted. And to Paulo, these houses spoke of an earlier time, a time from which he and Maya were far removed. After he and Maya had made love in her loft for the first time, he descended her stairs, looking out her window and into the deepening summer night before exclaiming, "This is paradise." From her loft, Maya laughed. She was a writer, unimpressed by cliches. She was used to this view and its foreignness, in the same way that she had become used to other views in other foreign cities far away from the land of their birth. Paolo hadn't even left his adopted land to visit her, and yet these quaint Victorian homes, so different from his parents' squat bungalow in Auckland, taunted him with their permanence, with the stories they possessed but didn't tell. Tonight he felt as though he floated above these pitched rooftops, sailing above the wind that crashed into windows and howled through cracks that had been left unrepaired. As much as he tried to feel the ground beneath him as he walked these city streets, he felt as though he were invisible, even to this town's ghosts. In Maya's case, she had chosen to live on the fourth floor of a modern apartment complex, buying herself a nice view of the hills and houses. A view was all she needed, for she didn't intend to settle here for good. Paolo wondered how a person could ever feel at home in a place that one had no desire to claim as one's home. He guessed it was Maya's rootlessness that allowed her to live in a city where he felt adrift. He looked up at Maya, asleep in her loft, the grills of its banister fashioned like a net that cradled her from harm. She had lived alone in too many foreign places for too long. She was used to the solitude more than he was.
Thank you, Monica, for that reading. So this story, Leaving Auckland, is a story about feelings of exile and loneliness, about the in-betweenness of existing between a homeland and an adopted land. And these two young people in this story, they're Filipinos with the commonality of living in New Zealand, but in different parts. And I think that this fact of living in different parts of New Zealand that sort of represent different things or have a different geography to them, a different sense to them. This is a significant enough difference to affect their relationship, I think. And it's sort of what keeps them from feeling completely connected. And so I wanted you to talk about this situation and this theme of exile and disconnection, not just in this particular story, but also in situations that you might have witnessed or experienced yourself.
Yeah, I love that question, Donna. Thank you for that. New Zealand's an interesting place because the more south you go, the whiter it gets. And the more north you go, the browner it gets. So Auckland is New Zealand's biggest city. Its Maori name is oh my God, Tamaki Makarau. Yeah, I was blanking. And it's very diverse. A lot of New Zealand's immigrants first land in Auckland, and at the same time, it has a heavy Maori presence, and it also has a very Pacific Islander presence too. So I think that a new immigrant like Paolo would feel more at home in Auckland because it's just more diverse and he just sees more people like him. But that doesn't mean that he feels completely at home. He still feels like an exile, and that feeling becomes accentuated even more when he goes further down south, to Wellington, which is the capital of New Zealand. And it's smaller, it's not as diverse, and it's more white. And I think that, like, I don't know, like, it has like a stronger English presence, which is how, and you have like more very old Victorian homes. And I think that both cities reflect like the attitudes of these two people toward like there's towards migration and feeling at home in a foreign country. So Maya, who is like the person Paolo is visiting, I think is, well, she has lived in America too, and she's lived in the Philippines, and then now she's living in New Zealand. I think she's more accepting of the fact that she'll never belong wherever she is. And Paolo, who didn't really choose to come to New Zealand but was brought here by his parents, never really had a choice in the matter. And so he isn't yet used to choosing to be an exile, like on purpose. So I think that's the difference between the two characters and like the two states of alienation and exile that they embody. And I think that these different attitudes towards alienation and exile are reflected throughout the collection, whether these are characters that live or belong to the Filipino diaspora or like have chosen to remain in the Philippines. Because I feel that, and because I've lived both in the Philippines, I'm living here right now, and like overseas, you can feel alienated and out of touch with your surroundings wherever you go. Even with your own people, you can feel that, you can feel invisible, you can feel that your true self isn't accepted by the people around you. And when you're overseas, you can also feel that you are able to express yourself more, that you're able to spread your wings a little more. But and it can be freeing too to go overseas, but at the same time, you're also contending with a different culture, and you're also contending with your own history of colonialism, which becomes even more accentuated when you travel to a white settler society, whether that be the US or New Zealand. So yeah.
Right. And I think that's, as you said, that's something that we see in a lot of the stories here. And I want to talk about a story that is set in the United States, a story called Stopover. Because what often connects us to another human being is a shared culture or a shared experience. But when experiences are layered on top of those commonalities for each of the people involved, there's going to be a different response and reaction, and there's going to be changes that could alter or negate those commonalities between those two characters.
Yes.
I think this is what happens in Stopover. We have two characters who were classmates in the Philippines, in Manila, when they were studying, they were English majors together. And now they're both living in the United States. And one of them, who works for an airlines, goes to visit her friend who is in a graduate program in Austin. And from the beginning, we see some tension between the characters that increases as the visit continues. And when the visit ends, there's a reference to the fact that if this parting had taken place in Manila, things would have looked differently. And
Yeah.
so it was interesting to me that we're looking at these characters at this particular scene through both a Filipino lens and an American lens. And so I was just wondering if this is a technique that you use when you're dealing with diaspora characters in your fiction.
Yeah, well, it's not really something I'm conscious of, but rather since I'm writing from experience, not that any of these characters are like direct representatives of people I've encountered in real life, but I think that in fiction, I'm able to write about the various characters and experiences I have within a community, which is like the Filipino diasporic community, that like, well, there's, as Chimamanda Adichie has said, like there's a danger of telling a single story. And there's this tendency from like coming from people outside our community to think that our experience is one and the same when it's not, because we're all different and we all approach like the struggles inherent in the immigrant experience in different ways. Like Evangeline decides to like just go to graduate school and study, and like, and she wants, I think she has bigger dreams. Like she wants to be more ambitious and she wants to, well, if there are obstacles to her dreams, then I think that she'd push, like she'd still push through with her dreams. While Kathy, I think, is more comfortable with, well, not necessarily giving up, but well, she's more comfortable with blue collar work. Like as long as she can travel, even if it means like taking on a job that can be demeaning at times, well, she's fine with that. And she, or at least she thinks she's fine with that until she encounters Evangeline, who's like the more ambitious of the two. So it's just, I find it very interesting to see how like different character types respond to like the same challenges. And I think that's where the stories come forth, and like, and it's also where conflicts come into play. And like, I just like, yeah, I like exploring those conflicts.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point you made about the single story. And I think that's what's so great about this book, is that you do give us different facets of the Philippine experience, not just in the Philippines, but outside of the Philippines. You yourself have a multifaceted experience as someone born and raised in the Philippines, but who has spent, you know, a lot of time outside of the Philippines as well. You did your MFA at Austin, and then your PhD in New Zealand. So I was thinking, was wondering how much time elapsed between living in those places and writing stories about those places.
So I wrote the first story in the collection as an undergrad at the University of the Philippines. This was in 2006 or maybe 2005. I'm not quite sure anymore. And I was reflecting on my memories of childhood in Delaware. And so we had returned from Delaware to the Philippines in 1995. And then I was reflecting on those memories in 2005 or six. So there was like a 10-year gap. And then like there was also that huge gap between childhood and adulthood, because like time passes very differently between childhood and adulthood. So there was like a 10-year gap. And then afterwards, So I was writing poetry mainly between 2006 and 2010. And then I got accepted into the Michener Center as a fellow for fiction because I applied as a fiction writer. And then I wrote the bulk of the collection between 2010 and 2013, which was my time in Austin. So I wrote Stopover, I wrote Love and Other Rituals. Like I wrote a lot of the stories that take place in the Philippines, I actually wrote in Austin. So I was like in Austin, remembering the Philippines and being nostalgic about the Philippines. And then, so I went to New Zealand for my PhD. I started in early 2015. So there was like a gap of a year and a half between my time in Austin and my time in New Zealand. I actually wrote one story during that year and a half gap when I stayed in the Philippines. That story's Inheritances. And then when I was in New Zealand, I wrote Leaving Auckland. I was there to write a novel about the Marcos dictatorship, but I took a break after my PhD proposal was accepted because like I was so tired and I didn't want to write anything academic. So I wrote Leaving Auckland while I was living in Wellington, which is like another major setting of the story. I think that was like the only story, or yeah, Stopover too. I wrote Stopover when I was in Austin. I wrote Leaving Auckland while I was living in New Zealand. So it was interesting to write about these places while I was living in those places. It presents its own challenges because like I'm more used to writing about places from afar.
Great. Well, okay, so you have 8 stories in the collection. 3 of
Yes.
them are set outside of the Philippines. And so two of those appear in the middle of the book, and then Leaving Auckland is your closing story. And as I was reading the stories, it always seemed very natural in terms of how I was going from story to story. But I was wondering if, there was what amount of deliberation went into deciding the ordering of the stories for you and your publisher.
I'm not sure how, like, I still don't know how I ordered them. I played it by ear mostly. Let's see, like I'll look at my table of contents just to remember how I did it. So I tried to distribute the stories set outside the Philippines across the collection instead of bunching them together. I wrote several stories about children and young adults, so I tried to like space those out too. And it felt that, to me at least, that Leaving Auckland was the best way to end the collection because like it's about a man who's trying to move forward in life despite like the challenges of moving forward as an immigrant man. And all of these characters are moving forward in their lives. And it was nice for me to end the collection with somebody who's confused and still trying to figure it out, because I feel that like with all these other stories, everybody is still trying to figure things out in their lives when the stories end. So yeah.
Great. And I do love the opening story a lot too. I like coming into this collection and starting with that story, The Feast of All Souls. So I want to talk about the fact that that your father was a poet and your mother is a writer. I mean, she's written essays, she's published a book, and the beautiful dedication you have in the book to both your parents. So as the child of 2 people who wrote, was it inevitable that you would become a writer? When you were growing up, were there things that you thought of being other than a writer?
I thought of being different things. Like I wanted to be a ballerina, for instance, but then I was born with a clubbed foot and I had surgery for that. But afterwards, my parents like kept telling me to take care of my foot and like not twist it. And like, I mean, and like into extreme positions. And like, obviously, if you're a ballet dancer, you can't avoid doing that. And then I had different dreams, but at the same time, when I think about all those dreams, I realized that all of them were stories. I was building stories for every role I wanted to play. So like, I want to be a ballerina, and then like I dream up a story. And then at some point I wanted to be a pilot, and then I was dreaming up another story. So even when I was dreaming myself into different roles, I was already becoming a writer. And I think as fiction writers, we do that a lot. Like we try to play different roles in our fiction. Like, and I'm glad that I don't have to, like, if I were to write about a pilot, then I don't have to like literally fly a plane to do that, because yeah, I wouldn't like ever do that. And I don't know, like I just think that because my parent, it wasn't inevitable and there was no pressure at all from them to be a writer. Like I think the pressure would have run the other, like would have been to like run the other way, because like it's not like a very lucrative profession, and there's a lot of financial insecurity like that comes with being a writer. But I think that the disposition was already there. It was likely in my blood. And then my parents created that welcoming space in which I could like explore that tendency, or I don't know, like I'm not sure if I'd call it talent, but they allowed me to explore that interest in ways that I probably couldn't have if I were growing up in another household that where my parents wouldn't have gotten it, or people who did not appreciate the arts.
Well, it's a beautiful environment to grow up in.
Yeah.
So you're talking about ballet. I'm wondering now if you dance tango, because the tango scenes in Leaving Auckland were really great.
Thank you.
So.
I wasn't dancing tango back then when I wrote that story. I had to do research for that, and because I was doing so much research, I was like, I actually want to dance this. So after I wrote the story, that's when I started taking lessons.
Wow.
And then I wrote, yeah, thank you. And I wrote a few more essays after I truly became a dancer. And like, thankfully, you don't have to, like, there aren't as many injuries like in tango as like in ballet. Like in ballet, like you're gonna break all your bones, but with tango, like you don't have to bend your body into unnatural positions, which I like.
No danger of whiplash when you're like moving your
well, and not really, like, because you're like positioned like that for the most part, and it's not I think that like it's your legs that are moving. It's like more like a walking dance than salsa, for instance. I think with salsa there's more of a danger of whiplash, but like salsa's fun too. I tried salsa, but like I got into tango a bit more.
Yeah, I was wondering about that when I was reading, because I have written some stories that include dance, but I'm not a dancer, and so I've had to like look at videos, to see how it's done. So I'm going to just check the chat, the Q&A, to see if there are any questions yet. No questions yet. So people feel free to put any questions there, but I have plenty of my own. So I wanted to talk a little bit about craft. I'm going to go back to the opening story, which is the Feast of All Souls. And there's a particular sentence there that really grabbed me. So I'm going to read it. The Baguio cemetery was awash in sunlight, and the smell of steamed corn, roasted peanuts, car exhaust, and newly washed hair gave the air a thick and confusing aroma. So I love that sentence because of the list of items in it. I think it's, you have these sort of like everyday items that you would find in this situation. I imagine there are vendors there that are selling food, or people are bringing their own food because they're sort of camped out for the day in the cemetery. And you have car exhaust, so it's sort of, you get this nice sense of the arrivals and departures. But the surprising thing for me was the newly washed hair, which I thought was a great addition because it makes you think, oh, wow, what's this all about? And then you think about, oh, people are here out of respect and they're, cleaning up, they're washing their hair. But I do love that sentence. And so I started to think, what, when you're setting a scene, what makes you decide what things you want the reader to pay attention to?
I'm not quite sure because like I usually just dream up a scene and then think of the things that I would observe, and then I think of the age of the character, and I also try to think about not just describing the scene but describing the character through what the character observes. So the main character of the Feast of All Souls and the narrator too is a young girl. She's probably 10 years old, and I wanted to show people what a young girl would observe when she's being brought to the cemetery for the first time. And so like because she's a child, she's more acutely aware of these details. So I think that Filipinos, like grown Filipinos anyway, wouldn't notice the newly washed hair, because in the Philippines, people wash their hair every day. And like shampoo is marketed very heavily in the Philippines. So it's like when you see people with their hair wet in the morning, that means it's morning. And like I think it's like even a point of pride in the Philippines, because like I had a friend who who didn't wash her hair every day. Like she was half Filipino and half European, and then she blow dried her hair, and people were like, oh, you don't wash your hair, ew. And then she was like, I don't get that, because like I blow dry my hair and I don't like going outside with my hair wet. And then like in other cultures, like I've heard in Japan, like if you go out with your hair wet, then it's considered bad manners. But in the Philippines, like if your hair is wet, that means that you're taking care of yourself. So it's one of those things that it was one of those details that brought me back to a childhood that I was feeling nostalgic for, from Austin. And at the same time, like I wanted to indicate what time of day it was without really saying what time of day it was through the details. So like newly washed hair, it's morning, people have just showered, and then their hair isn't dry yet. And then peanuts and like all of these things, like I just like wanted to show people that like once you get to the cemetery at 9 a.m, it's like a sensory overload. And so I wanted to convey that in that sentence.
Yeah, it was a sentence that really drew me in to the story. So I really appreciate it. Reading that and just feeling that sensation. So the other thing is, I think your characters are really well drawn. And I want to point to the story, Playing with Dolls, as an example of the characters. And in this story, the parents are individually two lovely and appealing people. They have their own group of friends who they're very popular with. But together, this husband and wife, there's no chemistry, or if there was chemistry, now there's no empathy, I think, and there's a rift between them. And in the middle is a young daughter who through whose eyes we see the story unfold. Yeah. And so one of the things that I loved about this story was the number of characters that are woven into the story, so that we learn not just about the interrelationships in this family, but also the social conventions and the politics and the history of the community and the country that they live in. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the inspiration for this story and what inspires a story in general for you?
So when I wrote that story, I was reading a lot of Evelyn Waugh upon the suggestion of Alan Gurganus, who noticed that I was holding back in my prose, and that like I had to be a bit more, I had to let loose a bit more and like have fun with my sentences. So he's like, read Evelyn Waugh. And I just loved like this. I loved how he like would draw a portrait of an entire social milieu. And like through him, I started reading Nancy Mitford, and then I returned to Jane Austen. And like I'm just really drawn to the comedy of manners. And like I also recently read Middlemarch, but that was like way, way after I wrote that story. And at the same time, I had just watched Oro Plata Mata, which is a Filipino film by Peque Galiaga, which portrays a an upper class family during World War II in the Philippines. So there was like just an assembly of people in that movie, and I was trying um to see if I could write about like an entire society within a single story. And I had so much fun. Like it's probably the story that I had the most fun writing, because these were people who were funny, and it's rare that I have the opportunity to be funny. And I think that people are funniest when they have a lot of people to react like to. And so there were characters in that story that I didn't really envision until I started writing it, like Cedric, who's like the guy who buys the father's car, the father's Porsche, when like the father runs away with a maid. Like I was talking about him with a friend the other day, that like that I love him for like these minor characters, like that story just gave me the opportunity to develop minor characters who may not be completely developed within the story, but are still like very much present. And I think it's the reason why I like character actors a lot, because like they're not really the star of they're not really the stars of a movie, but then their mere presence like gives the movie a different atmosphere, like a different flavor. So I was watching yesterday a feature about Harry Dean Stanton, who's like one of my favorite character actors. And yeah, like I think well, Cedric isn't Harry Dean Stanton, but like he's probably a little more like Eric Stoltz in The House of Mirth, which I was also reading while writing Playing with Dolls. Yeah, Edith Wharton was another inspiration for that story.
Oh, that's great. So I love the idea, or the fact that, you know, you got this advice from Alan Gurganus. And so attending the missioner program at Austin, where Elizabeth McCracken teaches, and
Yeah.
she is one of my favorite writers. So I was just wondering what it was
Mine
like
too.
to be in a classroom with her, or to, you know, get direction from her or guidance.
She's very generous. She's probably one of the most generous, if not the most generous mentors I've ever had when it comes to like advice and well, and like really reading closely like the stories we turned in for a workshop, because like she would notice things about my stories that I didn't notice at all, like how a character behaved or what a character saw, and like or what they said, like these she would praise that. And at the same time, like it's not that she wasn't strict with us, like she still had high standards that we had to live up to. And I think that it was one of the wonderful things I experienced about being in an MFA program, especially an MFA program like that, where there was just so much talent. And you ask yourself, why am I even here? Am I even that good? But then you realize that like I can do my ability level is similar, if not the same as these people. And it's not that I'm incapable of what other people are achieving. So it gives you a lot of confidence, and at the same time, it forces you to get out of your comfort zone and to like push yourself. Yeah.
It's a great experience to have. I'm going to check the Q&A again to see if we have questions. Okay, none yet. Still there for people to add their questions. I'm assuming they're going in the Q&A and not the chat. But okay, so I do have more questions I can ask you. Okay. So as I was reading the stories, and so some of the story, I want to talk about length of stories because that's something that I'm interested to when I write a story. Some of these are short, and some of them are longer. Leaving Auckland is one of the longer stories, and I think also Playing with Dolls is probably longer. So I'm wondering, when you're writing a story, and as it unfolds for you, do you have a sense of whether it's going to be a long or short story? And when you come to the end, I mean, do you know that it's the end? When do you know it's the end, I guess, is a question.
I think I'm like a driver that keeps driving until I'm there. And sometimes, especially with Leaving Auckland, I think that's the novella length story in the collection. I was at 7,000 words and I'm like, I'm not yet done telling the story. I think that when I start writing a story, I have a working sense of what the arc of the story will look like. I don't have a sense of the length of that arc, but I know what shape it'll take. And then I just keep going until I'm done. Yeah. And I think that there has to be some sense of resolution on the part of the character about how to move forward from their current situation. And like, in that sense, I think that my stories don't just stop. Like, I have to make them end. And there has to be some sort of, I know it sounds old-fashioned, but I think that my characters deserve to experience some form of epiphany before moving forward in their lives, before I let them go. So that's how the stories end. And sometimes it takes 5,000 words for them to get there. Sometimes it takes 3,000 words. Sometimes it takes 13,000 words, but we have to get there. The journey can be long, it can be short.
Right. I was thinking too, for instance, the first story where it's more contained, you have it all takes place in one, except for the backstory that you bring in, but it's contained, and you have, basically the mother and daughter, that story. When the mother takes the daughter for the first time to the cemetery to visit her cousin's grave. So it does seem more contained than the larger story of Leaving Auckland. But I don't know at the beginning, that it's going to be like the scope is going to be much larger when you first get that idea for the story, or if that sort of opens up for you as you write.
And I sometimes think that it depends on the character I'm working with. So with the first story, The Feast of All Souls, which is the shortest story in the collection, it's not that it lacks any depth. Like, I think that the epiphany that Ina, the main character, has is quite deep, but since she's a child, and I think she has it together more or less, she's not a confused child, she's very perceptive, she gets to that epiphany sooner. And with Paolo in Leaving Auckland, like, he just has so much more baggage, and he's so much more confused. And even when we end the story, he's still a bit more confused, but I think at the very least he has a little more self-awareness about his own confusion, but then he has to work through so much more.
Right. And I love observing nature of the young characters that you have in Feast of All Souls, and also Playing with Dolls, the young girls who are
Yeah.
who we see the action, the story through. Because as you say, you know, they're observant and they're very aware. And when you compare that character to the older character in Leaving Auckland, he's already got all this other experience that he's lived and so many more complications in his life, that sometimes things are not that easy to see for him. They're not that clear. So as a again, I appreciate the variety in this book, not just in terms of, you know, the geography, but also in terms of the age of the characters and where they're at emotionally. And also, interestingly to me, is like you're looking at different facets of society, different, like the characters in Playing with Dolls are upper class family. Then you have a story called Marisol, which is a different facet of society, which I found really interesting. So we're getting a really interesting look at a lot of different people in this collection. Is there any one story that was difficult for you to write? Any particular story that
I'm trying to think. Like, I wrote Marisol as a much younger writer, and I think that because it was harder for me to relate to this, like, or it, I don't really belong to this world where, like, because Marisol belongs to a working class family, and her mother is an OFW or an ex-OFW. And I never really lived in that world. I never really interacted that much with those characters. So it was harder for me to write about that world and about these characters. But like, I felt rewarded by the experience of writing about them, because like I had to do more research. I had to deal with these people a little more. So it forced me to step out of my comfort zone. And maybe also the title story of the collection, Love and Other Rituals, that was a bit challenging for me because it's told from the point of view of a gay man. And I'm not really, like, I'm not a gay man. And also, it was like, he also belongs to a different world, but at the same time I was like, I can't just limit myself to my world. I have to like also step into other people's shoes. So, and like that was scary for me because it's like, I'm not an LGBT writer. Like, will gay men react and queer people react negatively to this story? Like, am I getting things wrong? But then like it was received quite well. So I'm proud of that story too.
Yeah, that was a great story. And I understand your trepidation writing about characters that are unlike you. I've had the same concerns. We have a question in the chat, so I'm going to read it to you. This is from an anonymous attendee. I could be missing plenty of authors, but you're one of the few Filipino authors I know who has been published abroad, but consistently returns to the Philippines. How does that affect your approach to getting published or even marketing and promoting your work? How does your experience moving continents regularly for fellowships, residencies, shape your identity as a writer?
I think that it presents me with more opportunities of like advancing my career. Of course, there are challenges too. Like, if it might have been easier for me to get a bigger book deal or like placed this book with a bigger press if I lived in New York, but then you never really know, because I think that it all happens by chance. And these days, especially with the pandemic, all the networking takes place on the internet and on Twitter. So I think that like by maintaining my connections with friends I made at my MFA or PhD, or friends I've made online or at residencies, or even just at gatherings, even on Twitter, like Donna, I met on Twitter. It just helps. And I returned to the Philippines mainly because it's cheap to live here. And I take on freelance work to support myself, but I don't have to be working a full-time day job to support myself. Like in the States or in New Zealand, I would have had to work full-time to pay my rent and my bills. But here, because like the economic pressures are less, like for me, I have more time to write. And that's the one thing that matters, that you can write. Like everything else, like networking, that figures itself out. But if you're not writing, then it won't happen. And like by spending a huge amounts of time in the Philippines, I can get much more work done.
Yeah, that's a great situation that you have.
Yeah.
So, okay, here's, okay. Congratulations, Monica. Was there a story which you started writing and never completed? That's a good question. Do writers have this experience?
Sometimes there are like there was one version of Inheritances. You may not have read the story yet, but it's like a story told from the point of view of a Manila yuppie whose father has a nervous breakdown. Originally, that was told from the point of view of his mother, and it wasn't working. It was a completely different story, and it wasn't working. So I decided to change the story's point of view and to tell it from the son's point of view. So in that sense, that story was not completed. Otherwise, I try very hard to complete my stories. And sometimes they might be bad, but that just means that it's a first draft. And I can like rewrite the story. And then like for Stopover, for instance, I wrote like a horrible first draft for it. And then, but that was because like it was told from the other girl's point of view, the graduate student's point of view. And like, she didn't have like the main struggles of the story didn't really belong to her. Like it belonged to the other character. And then I was just using another character to analyze the other person's struggle. So it was, yeah. So I think that my uncompleted stories are my first drafts.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it's so interesting to hear you say that that Stopover was at first written from Evangeline's point of view.
Yes.
I could see how you know, it wasn't quite working because I really think it works so well from Kathy's point of view. So, and that's where the story for me is. So yeah, that's great to hear.
Yeah.
Oh shoot. Sorry. I thought I turned off my phone. But anyway, okay, let's see, where are we? Oh, let's see, we have a few minutes. I see no more questions in the chat. I've just one more question that, oh wait, okay, let's see. This is from Andrew Viloria. Hi, Monica, I look forward to reading the book.
Hi, cousin.
Oh, that's your cousin. Oh, how great. Oh, that's lovely. Okay, what helps you with writer's block and what gives you inspiration to go back to your writing when you need a break?
Just take lots of walks. Like, yeah, that's what I do when I feel like I'm hitting a wall. Maybe it's because I'm like driving in the wrong direction and I should like recalibrate things. And sometimes the only way to switch direction is to step back and take a walk, and I don't know, dance a little. And then like sometimes while I'm walking or I'm dancing, I'll have this like idea for a story that just comes to me in a flash, like an idea for how to change the story. And then afterwards, that's when I come back and work. Like just don't, like sometimes I push, like I just keep pushing, like sometimes I can be stubborn, but sometimes like I'm like, yeah, I need a break.
Yeah, it's like you're writing even when you're not writing, because your brain
Yeah.
always like has that story somewhere.
Yeah. And sometimes I have writer's block because I'm just trying too hard and I'm not letting loose. And sometimes it's by taking a break that you let your subconscious take over.
Okay, last question from the Q&A box. What are you working on now?
So I'm working on a novel about two friends in the Philippines who are like third culture kids. And it's loosely based on a friendship I had as a third culture kid myself with a half Filipina, half white girl. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I just really like writing about female friends. Like, it's probably the reason why Stopover is still my favorite story in the book, because like we're just like our friendships are so complicated and fraught, and it brings out it brings out a lot that you can like it allows you to explore femininity and the patriarchy in ways that you can't, like when you're just like looking at the world through the lens of a single woman.
Yeah, I love those topics too, those that explore female friendships. I actually just finished watching a series on Netflix. It's in Spanish. It's from Spain. It's called Las en la última fila. And what was interesting to me was that it was written by a man, and I thought, wow, he really got a lot of things right. So anyway, that's an aside, but I just want to say, looks like we're out of time. I want to say that I really enjoyed this book, Monica, and I want to thank people who came and asked questions, and I hope you had got anything that was on your mind and answered in our conversation. This is this the New Zealand version?
That's the Australian
version. Okay.
Yeah, and that's like, yeah, this is the American and Canadian version.
All right. So you can get it at Elliott Bay, or you can get it at your favorite independent bookstore, wherever you live. And I think we're going to bring Kate back on to finish out the night.
Yes. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Donna. That was a really wonderful conversation. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. We recorded tonight's event so we can put it up on our YouTube channel, and then folks can come back and check it out later. Yeah, as a reminder, both Donna and Monica's books are available at Elliott Bay Book Company. So yes, just congratulations, Monica, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Donna. This was a wonderful event. And thank you everyone for coming.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.